This song's called Dream Shapes, and we wrote it for the In Search of Tomorrow score. What I was going for when I wrote this song is quite a driving, simple song that has an epic ending, heavy, epic, a bit of metal, um, so that can be used for scenes in the documentary that have a bit of climax or that have that epic feel. I'm just going to go basically break through how the song was made layer by layer, and then I'm going to create a different video where I go through how I mixed it, because even though it's quite a simple song to begin with, at the end there's quite a lot of elements mashing together, and I wanted to make sure that I had that big wall of sound. So you can watch the second video if you're more interested in how I got that big wall of sound. So I'm just going to basically start with the drums. I mean, I'm not a drummer, and I basically programmed the simplest drums here, and then I later gave the track to our drummer Bryson Woodington. Shout out to Bryson. And Bryson was able to basically send me back a more complicated MIDI recording, which I could then feed back through my own drums. So, I mean, I didn't even use a sample library. I mean, when I programmed it, I used this drum kit designer that's built into Logic. Like when you're sketching out demos, it doesn't really matter about the drum samples you use normally. But what I later did was I fed it through, I think it was Easy Drummer, the metal edition. So again, I'll go through that in the mixing video. For now, let me just show you. I mean, the first half of the song is quite literally just a consistent kick. So the purpose of that was that I wanted it to be a kick and a bass that basically played together with a bit of a counter rhythm, and to give a really driving feel. This could be used then as well under simple parts of the documentary. When people are talking, it can be used as background music, and then when the song itself becomes more interesting, that could be matched up to scenes that are more interesting. So let me get to here. So again, it's quite literally just a 4/4 kick until the first heavy section kicks in. I mean, it's not complicated at all. I literally programmed it in like this. As I said, I'm not much of a drummer, but what you can do is you can program in something simple like that, and then open up the MIDI and add whatever little details you like. You can see it's very simple. What I did do here though was I played around with the velocities to create a more live feel. Something I'm not going to go into in great detail, but what you might do is you might program it in, um, really basically, even using your mouse, and then you can select drums themselves and change the velocities here to give it a more of a live human feel. Something we do quite a lot of here, because quite a lot of the music that Weary Pines records is programmed or performed at a keyboard at the very least. And what you often do is you'll play in the part on keys and then work backwards, edit in every little detail of the velocity to give it more of a live feel, which is quite funny. It used to be that in music production, you want to record the best, the most perfect quality recording, and then make it sound even better using mixing techniques. Whereas these days, people tend to work backwards, where they're programming it in and it sounds too perfect, so they need to work with some mixing or production to make it sound a bit more human or a bit more trashy, especially in this kind of genre with the kind of 80s sound. All right, so that's the drums. Let me just bring in the bass. So for the bass, I used Tal Uno LX, which is a beautiful plugin, by Togo Audio Line. And I actually used a preset, I think, in this. I used a Reverb Machines presets. So Reverb Machines are a company that create preset packs. You can often find even genres specifically to what you're writing. I do create a lot of synths from scratch, but I was always taught that you should find a preset you like. So it was this BBNG, and then tweak it yourself. Sort of, again, you can start with a decent sounding preset. I mean, there's no shame in using presets. They're designed by somebody so that you can find a sound that you like. But you know, you encourage people to basically sort of change it up a bit, tweak the sound to your liking. Um, okay, let me just solo that. I'm going to just mute the drums for now. Just, I mean, this is a really simple bass line as well. Let me just, I turned off, maybe I've turned off the arpeggiator by accident there. Yeah. So obviously let me just use this as an example to show you how to set up an arpeggiator. So this preset itself is quite literally single hits. And what I obviously did was turned on the arpeggiator. So now, and then you can just change the rate. Or use sync mode, which is there you go. So now if I press play on that, you'll hear how it sounds. Actually, I think it was half that speed. Yeah. Let me get the drums in. So you can see that kick bounces perfectly off that and creates a nice, what I would call a driving feel. Open up this bass MIDI for you. So as you can see, it's really simple in terms of writing. I like to write quite simple bass lines and then let other elements, you know, do the talking. If you create space between certain layers, then you've got space to fill with other layers. I think I actually also put a bit of portamento on this. So portamento, let me just pause this and I'll explain what portamento is. So portamento is a bit of a slide. So if you're playing between one note and another, if you ever hear that effect, it goes rather than just straight to the. I'll play it for you on keyboard. Do you see the way it kind of warps down? You can turn the portamento up. It's a bit of a smooth glide. Would help if I had it turned on. See the way it slowly falls, slowly rises. I think it gives a more interesting sound. So let me see if I can play this. You'll be able to hear how we did it. It's a bit too slow. It just adds a bit of interest to the ear, a bit of colour, the way it falls, and it sounds machine-like. I like that in music, just little small details that add interest. Often if it's very rigid and robotic, the listener can pick up on that. You want to make it sound somewhere in between human and mechanical is what I well, I mean, it could be just a preference, but I find it works well in this kind of music. Okay, so I mean, that is to the extent the guts of the song. And I mean, I wrote it just like this. And that allowed me, this is the skeleton of the song, it allowed me to then fill in the parts, so it's not quite literally just 2 layers, 3 layers. So what you want to do then is add a bit of color. Something rhythmical is often a good thing. In this genre of music, we would use a lot of arpeggios, so I'm pretty sure that's what I did next. I used this. I used a Serum patch. I mean, Serum's another great piece of software synth. Um, yeah, I used one of the sequences, SQ Wave Table Dancer. Okay, let me just press play on that. I'll just solo the synth itself. So I mean, it's a very simple pattern. It's just the same chord going up and down by into a fourth or second. And then now you hear that with the bass. So it's just a bit of, again, ear candy, as we like to call it. That's something to make, add a bit of interest to the track. Again, I wanted the track to be sparse, but sparse doesn't mean literally no layers. It means just a lot of space between the layers. Get the drums on. Maybe turn that portamento down a little bit. So again, this is the same synth, but just playing a different chord. Picked these sounds because we're writing for the 80s sci-fi documentary and wanted to find some sounds that sounded like glitchy, computery synths. So I mean, the song has very little going on here. It quite literally builds like that. I have got some strings, these beautiful Oliver Arnold's chamber evolutions. Now, I mean, I could make a whole video series on these. I use this on almost every Weary Pine song. So, in a nutshell, it's sampled string playing, drawn out notes, and you can use this grid and pick different sounds. And then when you play on the keyboard, you can hold a chord. Let me just show you. The different movements. Every note has its own movement, and you can pick randomly what way you want that note to sound. Absolutely beautiful. I mean, I use it sometimes in the forefront of a song, or if I'm writing an ambient song, it could be the bed of the song. But for this and for a lot of other songs, I actually quite literally use it as what I would call like an ambient bed in the background. So I'm basically holding, as you can see in the MIDI, I'm just holding chord that's in the root key of the song, and I'm holding it for the whole song, and then bringing in other notes, as you can see here. Other notes that are in the same key come in as the song builds. Now, to an extent, this is quite random. I've just played it live over the rest of the song. Let me show you how it sounds over there. It just adds a bit of ambience. Again, this will be very low in the mix whenever I end up mixing the track, but it just adds this bed of a vibe, of a room, of a kind of atmosphere. And again, like I said, you can use this as the main instrument on a track, or in this case, just to create a bit of, again, ear candy. So like if you're writing a sparse song, you want things to be happening in the background that are very subtle and changing over time, and that creates more interest for the listener. Otherwise, it would quite literally be a loop of four kicks and a loop of bass playing over and over. Okay, let me move on to the more, I guess, the more interesting part of the song. So as I said earlier, the song builds, and the intention of it is that to have an epic ending. So I visualize this as a band playing, and then the band kicks in at the end, the heavy metal part at the end. So let me just, the mix is a little off at the minute because I actually mixed it separately. But if you know the song, you'll know that it gets quite heavy at the end. Now I'll just go through the layers that I used for the wall sound, and then later I can show you the full song and in that context. So here I've got a synth organ using Zeta 2 by Cakewalk. I mean, this is just quite literally a sine kind of sounded synth. Let me go to the keyboard and I'll show you. So basically the chord progression that I wanted to use, I wanted to play through some organs, and I've got that, and I've actually got an organ which is, if I remember correctly, no, that's not the organ. The Leeds Town Hall, which I've got in here somewhere. Town Hall organ, which I got free. I can't quite remember the name of the company now. So I think Interstellar was a reference track for this song. That feeling from the Hans Zimmer score where the big organ kicks in. And I wanted that atmosphere of space at the start of the song as it builds, and then a big heavy epic, you know. Yeah, so I'll play it here. This is where the song really kicks in. So, I mean, it's the same chord. So I really like that chord progression, and I've layered it up with organ and with this Zeta synth organ. Let me see if they'll play together. Yeah. The reason I combined the synth organ from Zeta is simply because I wanted it to sound a bit more like the 80s. I mean, the job we were hired for was to write music that sounded like a lot of 80s scores, 80s sci-fi scores, and obviously I wanted to combine that interstellar feeling so the listener recognized that kind of, I mean, it's a very popular movie, Interstellar, and recognize that kind of feeling, but whilst also throwing in some sounds from the 80s. That's in a nutshell what you do when you're producing these kind of tracks. You want to trigger like sonic memories with the listener. Okay, let me just show you that with the bass. I think that's the bass, yeah. Now, I've also got these, what I call J bends. They're just Zeta tracks that I've programmed. Let me show you. And they've got this warping effect that changes over time that gives, I mean, I actually originally heard it in a James Blake song, which is why I call them J bends. I basically figured out how to recreate that effect, and you'll hear how, I mean, we use this in a lot of our songs. It slowly falls in out of tune and it falls into tune, and you hear how it kind of adds this really creepy effect over the organs. audio's glitching out there a little bit. You hear the way they wave in. I'll go over it again in the mixing section. So I mean, this is the peak, the end of the song. And I wanted to basically, as I said earlier, create a big wall of sound. So I went for this big orchestral strings coming at the end as the song as it peaks during that heavy section with the organ. Using Tina Guo, Legato, beautiful, beautiful cello sample library that you can purchase online, and it'll work within Kontakt. And again, like the musical pattern here I'm playing is quite standard. Just going up the scale, or you can harmonize it like. Oh, 1 second, I'm on legato mode. Basically going up in either minor or major thirds. Quite a standard technique. I would often do that on cellos, and I've also got a cello that's essentially playing the bass or rising with the melody. And then I've got a violin, and I'll open that up. Spitfire Studio Strings, violins, and I've got the long on there. When you're using sampled string libraries, I mean, some of them are, especially the Spitfire products, are spectacular sounding. And 2022, they sound as realistic as you know. I've been doing this a long time and using a lot of different products over the years, and the Spitfires, they genuinely do sound like real playing. And I mean, I'll go through it. Essentially, in a nutshell, what a sample library is they'll have taken a microphone, gotten a person to play every iteration of the same note, so that when you press that on your keyboard, it plays that recording as if it's live. Um, they were very rudimentary when sample libraries came out, and you'd have to be a bit creative in making them sound like real players. These days, they sound genuinely like straight, like scarily real. But again, what a good common technique if you're trying to get your strings to sound more real, if you've got an older library, or maybe you don't have a lot of libraries, is usually just to layer them. So you'll layer up. I've layered up this violin from Spitfire with the Tina Guo cello, and then maybe even if you can record one live string player. So I could have hired a violinist to play the same part over the top, and then suddenly the listener's ears hear a real recording and not something that's been programmed. So again, I've got violin here, another layer, which is probably, yeah, Spitfire again. What I've done here really is spaced out the strings. So I've got the cello playing the lower end of the frequencies and the violin playing the higher. I mean, that is how orchestral arrangement works. Certain instruments in the orchestra will stay within a certain range, or will only be able to play a certain range of notes. And so that's how you get that big the wide spectrum. I have got another element here of strings that I've completely forgotten about that are quite heavily featured in the song. Uh, so the spiccato. So I used Joshua Bell violin. So let me just show you spiccato on the keyboard. So again, you have to play in the range that the instrument's tuned to. Let me just find out where the spiccato button is. There we go. So what I'm playing here is essentially a chord but spread out in an arpeggio, just like I would do with the synthesizer. This is a big part of the song. I'll play it with the strings at the end so you can hear how it sounds. We'll go into the mixing of this because it was actually quite a difficult song to mix. There's so many things going on. Those songs are quite hard to make sure every element of the song's got its own space. That's the strings. I mean, that's the guts of the song. I've recorded some because I wanted it to be a bit heavy metal. I recorded some guitars, and I mean, I've got no effects on them here. I'm just playing open notes. What you do when you're recording guitars, particularly like metal sounding guitars, is you might just perform the same thing multiple times and then layer those up together. That's it. Like in its simplest form, I'm playing the same thing. You might play it one way in the guitar and then play the same thing an octave up or in different chord positions, just so that these layers, when they're stacked on top of each other, aren't identical. And that creates interest to the listener, and you can feed each layer of the guitar through a different sounding amp. Again, I use like Amplitube is one I use. I use even the amps that are built into Logic. See if I can get you one. Amp Designer. I mean, I'll just show you very quickly how this might sound if you just you pick a preset, work backwards. Let's find something that sounds like metal. Ribbon. Just like that. Just bring that over to these. You would often change the sounds of each layer so that they're all complementing each other. And again, a lot of the times this is just experimentation. So I've just picked 3 at random here. Let's see how they sound. Again, I'll go through that in the mixing video. I mean, that's the song in a nutshell. I've got some effects that I've put in there. These are sounds that I found that to me sounded like those kind of 70s and 80s disco or sci-fi sound effects. I think I probably added these at the end of the song. I was probably maybe the director, David Weiner, asked us to make it sound slightly more retro, and so we would have worked backwards to add sounds that trigger those kind of, like I call them, sonic memories for the listener or the viewer of the documentary. I mean, that's the song in a nutshell. I'll be able to play it through in the second video. I'm going to go through the mix itself and show you how I got all these parts to sound like a one big commercially produced track. Um, the last thing I'll show you in this video is what I would have done, our process. So we write the tracks like this in Logic, and we do mix as we write. So I will go through and mix the track. But then when I'm done, when the demo of the track's finished, I will quite literally solo. Let me just see if I can do that. I'll solo each element and bounce the track. And what I'll do is I'll turn the track up to 0. I'll take away any effects, and I'll bounce each layer. Bouncing is just exporting, and then I'll take all those stems, as they're called, and I'll drag them into a fresh session for mixing. And this is the same process we follow for every single song. The mixing part for me is the funnest, and I've got my experiences in music production and mixing engineering, so that's the part where you essentially take all these parts that have been written as a demo and make them sound more like a commercially produced track or something for a film score. But you do, to some extent, try to get the sounds right during the writing process. Okay, that's about it for this video. I hope that you enjoyed.